She didn't even look up from her phone. The driver, a 20-year veteran with a commercial license and a spotless record, had
See that
asked
bodega?
one single question.
Yes, I remember.
Just one.
That's the one.
Ma'am,
Such
should I
good
take
memories.
the expressway or surface road?
Here you go, sweetie.
Catherine
Wow,
Westbrook
thank
lowered her
you.
phone,
That's very
looked
kind
at
of
the
you.
man in the
Enjoy
rearview
it.
mirror with the calm, cold patience of someone swatting a fly and said, "Get out of my car." He thought she was joking. She was not joking. She sat in the back of that Mercedes on the shoulder of I-90 and waited until he collected his jacket, stepped out onto the asphalt, and closed the door behind him. Then she picked her phone back up and called Margaret. "We need another driver." That was the 7th one in 30 days. Marcus Hayes read the job posting 48 hours later, standing in the unemployment line with his daughter's hand in his $340 in his account and rent due in 4 days. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. If you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for everything that comes next. Have you ever taken a job you knew was dangerous just because you had no choice? The letter had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 3 days. Marcus hadn't opened it. He already knew what it said. The return address, Chicago Municipal Utilities, told the whole story before the envelope did. He'd been moving it from the counter to the table to the top of the refrigerator and back again, like maybe a different location would change the number inside. He finally tore it open on a Tuesday morning while Sophie was eating breakfast. Past due balance, $1,847. Disconnect date November 14th. He folded it in half, put it in the junk drawer, and poured himself a cup of coffee that had been sitting in the pot since yesterday. Sophie was watching him from the table. 7 years old, dark brown eyes, her mother's eyes, the kind of eyes that saw everything and said nothing. That last part wasn't a personality trait. It was a diagnosis. Selective mutism, the therapist had said 6 months after Sarah died. Her nervous system is protecting her, Mr. Hayes. The silence isn't stubbornness, it's survival. Marcus had nodded. He'd been nodding a lot in therapists' offices that year. Morning bug. Sophie held up her sketchbook, the one she used to talk. Pages full of drawings and short written sentences, her own private language. She'd drawn a bowl of oatmeal with a smiley face in it. Brown sugar. She nodded. He made it. Store-brand oats, the cheap kind, because the name brand was $2 more and $2 was $2. He watched her eat and drank his cold coffee and opened Indeed on his phone and scrolled. 47 applications in 6 weeks. 3 callbacks, 0 offers. The freight company had folded in March. 600 jobs gone in a single conference call. They'd mailed the severance checks with a letter that used the phrase "difficult but necessary restructuring" 4 times in 3 paragraphs. Marcus had a CDL, 12 years of clean driving, and a work history that existed entirely in an industry that had just evaporated beneath him. He scrolled past the warehouse jobs. $11 an hour, weekends required. He couldn't do weekends. Sophie's therapy was Saturday mornings with Dr. Patel, and that wasn't negotiable. Nothing about Sophie was negotiable. He scrolled past the delivery gigs, the overnight logistics runs, the positions that paid enough but required availability that didn't account for a 7-year-old who needed to be picked up at 5:30. He was about to close the app when he saw it. Private driver, immediate hire, Westbrook Development Group, LLC. Competitive compensation. Clean driving record, required discretion. Required no prior experience in private service necessary. No hourly rate listed, no schedule details. The posting had been up for 11 days with no edits, which meant either nobody was applying or nobody was lasting. He clicked the contact link and typed a message before he could think about it too hard. The callback came in 40 minutes. He was zipping Sophie's backpack when his phone buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, clipped female, no warmth. This is Margaret Cross, personal assistant to Miss Catherine Westbrook. You submitted an inquiry this morning." "Yes, that's right. I'll be direct. The position has been open 31 days. We've interviewed 11 candidates. 7 were hired. All 7 are gone." She paused, not for effect. She was simply delivering information. "Still interested?" Marcus looked at Sophie, who had stopped fussing with her backpack and was watching him with those wide, steady eyes that always knew when something mattered. "Yes, still interested. Can you be at the address I'm sending you at 10 o'clock? I'll be there." He dropped Sophie at school, watched her walk through the double doors. She never looked back anymore, hadn't since Sarah, and he'd stopped waiting for it. Then he drove across the city toward the North Shore. The gate was set back from the road, marked only by a small brass plaque on one of the stone pillars. Westbrook. Just that. No number, no greeting, no pretense of being approachable. He pressed the intercom. Hayes. Margaret's voice. Yes. The gate swung open. The driveway was long. The house at the end of it was enormous. Stone and glass, 3 stories, the kind of architecture that communicated wealth without trying to communicate anything at all. It had the feeling of a place that had never been particularly warm, even when people were happy in it. Margaret was waiting at the front door. Mid-50s gray blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead like a headband. She looked him over with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had sized up a great many people and generally been right about them. You're early. Come in. She walked fast and talked while she moved. Full-time 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. Hours generally run 8 to 6, sometimes later. Compensation is $4,000 a month. She glanced back at him. Plus full health benefits, effective day 30. She turned a corner without slowing. No overtime. Salary is inclusive. In exchange, you're available, reliable, and she stopped in the middle of the hallway and turned to face him, directly discreet. Non-negotiable, Mr. Hayes. What you see where she goes, what she says, none of it leaves this property. Not to friends, not to family. Understood, understood. The 7 drivers who preceded you each failed in different ways. Margaret's voice carried zero editorial judgment. She might have been reading from a report. 2 complained about the schedule. 1 asked too many questions. 2 made the mistake of attempting casual conversation. 1 made a comment about Miss Westbrook's choice of destinations that she found inappropriate. And the 7th, he asked whether to take the expressway or the surface roads. Marcus processed that for a moment. She requires someone who understands that silence is a condition of employment, not a symptom of a problem to be fixed. Margaret studied him. Miss Westbrook will see you now. He'd expected an office, a formal room with a desk designed to establish distance and authority. Instead, Margaret led him through a set of glass doors onto a wide stone terrace at the back of the house. The property fell away behind it in a long slope of bare November lawn, gray and skeletal at the tree line. The kind of landscape that looked like it was waiting for something. Catherine Westbrook stood at the far end of the terrace with her back to them, hands clasped behind her dark coat, perfectly fitted silver hair pulled back without a strand out of place. She did not turn around when they came through the doors. Miss Westbrook, Mr. Hayes is here. Catherine Westbrook turned around. She was in her late 60s, the kind of face that had been striking once and was now something harder and more interesting than striking. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a chart. All information, no performance. Sit. He sat in the iron chair at the small terrace table. She remained standing. 12 years with a CDL. No violations. Laid off 8 months ago when Continental Freight folded. You have a child, single parent. He hadn't put any of that on the inquiry form. Yes, 7 men have sat in that chair. Most of them were more qualified than you on paper. Every single one of them is gone. She folded her hands in front of her. Do you want to know why your assistant mentioned the silence? Not just silence. Presence. They couldn't manage being present without making it about themselves. Every one of them needed something from me. Reassurance, conversation, approval, acknowledgement. I don't have that to give. Her voice was flat, not cruel, just precise. The way someone is precise when they have run out of patience for softness. I need someone who can exist in the same space as me without requiring anything. Can you do that? Marcus thought about 14 months of solo parenting, 14 months of sitting in a hospital waiting room, a therapist's office, a school counselor's conference, 14 months of holding conversations entirely by himself because the other person in the room had gone silent. Yes, I can do that. Catherine looked at him for 5 full seconds. Monday. She turned back to face the lawn. Margaret appeared at his shoulder. I'll walk you out. He sat in his car at the end of the driveway before pulling out through the gate. $4,000 a month. Health insurance. He called his landlord. Mr. Torres, Marcus Hayes, 4B. Torres sounded tired, resigned. "Look, I have a job. Starts Monday. I'll have money to you by the 15th and catch the balance by end of December. 2 more weeks." Long pause. 2 weeks, Hayes. Thank you. He hung up and sat with the silence for a moment. Then he pulled out and drove toward Sophie's school. He didn't explain the job to her that night. He wasn't sure how. "I'm going to drive a woman who fires people for asking directions" didn't exactly land as reassuring. Instead, he read her 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web, the same 2 they'd read 3 times already because she always tapped the page when she wanted to go back. And when he turned off the lamp, she picked up her sketchbook from the nightstand. She held it up. 2 stick figures. His had a big smile. Hers had a small one more than usual. Above them, in her careful handwriting, "We're okay, Daddy." His voice cracked on the last word just slightly. "Yeah, Bug. We are." Monday, 7:45. Marcus stood at the side entrance of the Westbrook estate 15 minutes before 8. Shoes shined, dark slacks buttoned down the whole effort. First day with a woman who'd fired 7 drivers. 15 minutes early was the minimum. Margaret handed him a key fob, a gate code card, and a black folder without preamble. 3 vehicles in the garage. Primary is the black S-Class. Protocols are on page 2. She handed everything over with the efficiency of a military briefing. "Miss Westbrook will be ready at 8:15. Understood." She held his gaze a beat longer than the information required. "I've said understood to 7 drivers, Mr. Hayes." "I know. Just drive steady." 8:14:40. Catherine Westbrook came through the side entrance and walked to the open rear door of the Mercedes with the energy of a woman who had somewhere to be, and had always had somewhere to be, and would continue having somewhere to be until she decided she didn't. She got in without looking at Marcus. He closed the door, got behind the wheel, waited. Riverside Avenue, corner of Riverside and Morgan. He pulled out. He did not ask why. He knew Riverside and Morgan. It was 6 blocks from his apartment. Riverside looked the same in November as it did every other month, a neighborhood that had been promised things over several decades and received most of them only partially. The corner of Riverside and Morgan had a bodega, a vacant storefront with plywood over the windows, and an empty lot that someone had tried to turn into a community garden and then given up on. Marcus pulled to the curb. In the mirror, Catherine Westbrook looked out the window. Her face was composed, controlled, entirely still, but her eyes moved across the lot, the storefront, the street with an intensity that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with something older and more private. She stayed that way for 3 minutes. Then, Lincoln Park. He drove. Lincoln Park was small, unremarkable, a city park with a walking path and a pond that went gray and cold in November. Catherine got out without a word and walked to a bench near the eastern edge of the path. She sat there for 9 minutes, did not look at her phone, did not move, just sat and looked at the water. Marcus didn't stare. He watched the mirror in intervals, careful and quiet. On her way back to the car, he noticed the bench had a small bronze memorial plaque on the armrest. He was too far to read it. He filed it away. But what nobody in that room knew was Marcus had spent 14 months sitting in silence beside his daughter, who couldn't speak. He understood silence wasn't a problem to be fixed. By Friday, he had the route memorized. Not just the destinations, but the rhythm of them. 2 to 4 stops a day. Always Riverside or the surrounding blocks. Always quiet, out-of-the-way places. Corners, parks, a stretch of sidewalk outside a building that had changed hands. And at every stop, Catherine Westbrook would sit or stand and look with that same focused, controlled, devastated attention. No one watching her from a distance would have called it grief. She was too composed for that. But Marcus recognized what it was because he'd felt it from the inside. It was the kind of grief that had gone on long enough to calcify into something you carried rather than something that moved through you. It was grief that had become a daily practice, a ritual. On Thursday, he parked close enough to read the bench plaque. In memory of Jonathan Michael Westbrook, who loved this park and believed in this city, 1985 to 2022. He sat with that for a moment. Then Catherine came back and he drove her home and neither of them said a single word. That night after Sophie was in bed, Marcus opened his laptop. Jonathan Michael Westbrook. The results were immediate. Westbrook Development VP and son of billionaire developer Catherine Westbrook dies suddenly at 36. Photos pulled up alongside the articles. A young man with his mother's jaw and cheekbones and apparently none of her frost. He was photographed laughing at ribbon cuttings, pointing at blueprints, standing in what looked unmistakably like Riverside, shaking hands with a woman who was crying and not trying to hide it. Marcus read for 2 hours. Jonathan Westbrook had spent 5 years building something he called the Southside Renewal Initiative. Not demolition, not luxury conversion, not the kind of development that erased a neighborhood and replaced it with condos and a Whole Foods. Actual investment. Affordable housing preservation, green space, a community center he'd been designing personally tailored to the specific blocks of Riverside with input from actual residents. He gave interviews about it, called it the work of his life. Died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday in March at 36 years old. 2 months later, Westbrook Development Group announced a major new project in Riverside. Marcus pulled up the development announcement and read it. The language was corporate, clean, optimistic. Revitalization, modern infrastructure, economic opportunity. Demolition of existing residential blocks. New mixed-use construction, premium retail and residential units. He sat back in his chair. The corner of Riverside and Morgan where Catherine sat and looked at an empty lot with those burning, restrained eyes. That corner was in the zone marked for demolition. So was the block with the community garden that someone had tried and given up on. So was Lincoln Park, marked in the report as adjacent green space potential integration into development footprint. And 6 blocks north of all of it, marked with a small red square in the project map, was the address of Marcus's apartment. His building, Sophie's school 2 streets over. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and stood in the dark kitchen. He thought about a woman who drove into a neighborhood every single day to sit with her dead son's name in the very place her company was planning to erase. He didn't know what to make of that. He didn't know if she was honoring something or destroying it. He didn't know if Catherine Westbrook was the woman in that park or the signature on that development plan. Maybe both. Maybe that was the whole terrible point. But he knew this much. Sophie's school was on that map. Their street was on that map. Every family he'd ever waved to in the parking lot. Every neighbor who'd slipped a casserole under his door the week Sarah died. Every kid who used that half-finished community garden like it was theirs. All of it was inside Catherine Westbrook's project footprint. And Monday morning he was going to get back in that car. He was going to drive her there. And he was going to say nothing. For now. Friday, coming back from Lincoln Park, Catherine spoke. Not an address, not a direction, just out of nowhere into the silence that had held for 5 days solid. You have a daughter. Marcus's eyes went to the mirror before he could stop them. Catherine wasn't looking at him. She was watching the window. Yes, ma'am. 7 years old. Silence. Her name, Sophie. Another half block of quiet. Her mother. He kept his eyes on the road. She passed away 14 months ago. Nothing for a long moment. Then Catherine Westbrook said 2 words. No performance in them, no social obligation, just 2 words placed into the space between them like something she meant and hadn't planned to say. I'm sorry. Thank you. He drove. In the mirror, he almost missed it. The way you almost miss something that happens in the space between one breath and the next. Catherine Westbrook's expression shifted. A fraction. A hairline crack in that composed, impenetrable face. Not grief, not pity. Something that lived beneath both of those things. Something that recognized him. He looked back at the road. He drove her home. He parked in the garage, got out, opened her door. She walked inside without a word. He stood in the garage for a moment in the silence. He needed this job. He needed this salary. He needed those benefits for Sophie, for Dr. Patel, for the next 12 months of trying to keep their lives from collapsing. And he was driving the woman whose company was going to demolish the only neighborhood that had felt like home since Sarah died. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with that. But he knew one thing. He was coming back Monday. The second week started the same way the first one ended. Silence. A black Mercedes and Catherine Westbrook sitting in the back seat like a woman who had decided long ago that the world owed her nothing, and she owed it even less. But Marcus had spent the weekend thinking. Not about the job, not about the salary, not even about the development map with its clean red squares drawn over the streets where he and Sophie lived. He'd spent the weekend thinking about that single moment on Friday. "I'm sorry." And the way Catherine had said it. Like the words had escaped before she could stop them. Like she hadn't meant to be human and it had happened anyway. He picked her up Monday at 8:14 and drove her to Riverside and Morgan without being told. He already knew the route. She didn't comment on that. But he caught the small pause before she settled back in the seat. Not approval, nothing that warm, just the absence of disapproval. And he filed that away too. They sat at the curb for 4 minutes this time. Catherine looked out the window at the empty lot at the plywood-covered storefront across the street at a man in a heavy coat, walking a dog along the opposite sidewalk. Her hands were folded in her lap with the precision of someone who had taught themselves not to fidget through decades of boardrooms and negotiations and moments far worse than both. Marcus looked straight ahead. When she said Lincoln Park, he was already putting the car in drive. At the park, while Catherine sat at the bench with Jonathan's name on it, Marcus stayed in the car with the engine off and his phone in his lap pretending to read the news. He wasn't reading the news. He was thinking. He was thinking about the development plan, about the red squares, about the fact that the man whose bench she sat at every day had spent 5 years of his short life trying to build something in the exact neighborhood his mother's company was now preparing to take apart. He didn't look at her while she sat there. He'd learned quickly that she didn't want to be watched. What she did at those benches at those corners was private in the way that very few things are truly private anymore. The kind of thing a person does when they believe or hope that no one is paying attention. He paid attention. He just made sure she couldn't tell. When she came back to the car, her face was composed, her coat perfectly straight, her expression the same controlled blank it always was. She got in. He closed the door, got behind the wheel. "Thank you." It wasn't directed at anything specific. It wasn't warm. It was the practiced acknowledgement of someone who had been raised to observe social forms even when they'd stopped believing in the feelings behind them. Of course. He drove. That was week 2, day 1. If something had shifted between them on Friday, neither of them was going to be the first one to mention it. That suited Marcus fine. He had plenty to think about without adding conversation to it. What he hadn't been able to stop thinking about, the thing that had kept him at his kitchen table until past midnight on Saturday with his laptop open and his third cup of coffee gone cold, was a single line buried in paragraph 14 of the Westbrook Development Group project brief. Phase 1, demolition scheduled to commence second quarter pending final municipal approval. Second quarter, that was April, maybe May at the latest. It was November. He had at most 6 months before the building that housed his apartment, Sophie's school 2 streets over the corner store where Mr. Omar knew Sophie's name and always put a butterscotch candy on the counter for her without being asked before all of it became a construction site. 6 months. And he was driving the woman who was making it happen. He thought about that every morning when he pulled through the gate. He thought about it on the quiet drives through Riverside, watching Catherine look at the neighborhood through tinted glass with those eyes that held something she'd never explained to him. He thought about what it meant that she came here every day, whether it was guilt or grief or the specific agony of a person who had made a decision they couldn't reverse and had chosen to watch it unfold from the back seat of a car rather than look away. He didn't know. He couldn't know. So he drove and said nothing and waited. He was good at waiting. 14 months of solo parenting had taught him that. The second week settled into its own rhythm. Tuesday she added a new stop. A small community center on the east end of Riverside, a converted storefront with a hand-painted sign and a bulletin board in the window full of flyers. She had him pull up across the street, and she sat for 6 minutes looking at it. He watched people go in and out. A woman with 2 kids, an older man with a cane, a teenager with a backpack who held the door for the old man and didn't look like he was making a point of it, just did it. Wednesday. Margaret was waiting at the car when Marcus pulled around from the garage, and she had a look on her face that was not her usual expression of efficient neutrality. "She wants to change the route today," keeping her voice low even though Catherine wasn't in earshot yet. She'll give you the address in the car. It's a new location." She paused in a way that told him the pause was significant. "She hasn't been there in 8 months." "All right. I'm telling you so you're not startled." And for just a moment, the professional armor shifted enough that he could see something underneath it. Worry. Not the administrative kind, the actual human kind. "Just drive steady." Catherine came out of the side entrance at 8:15 exactly. Got in, door closed. A full minute passed before she spoke. "Mercy General." "Main entrance." Marcus pulled out. Mercy General was on the north side 20 minutes away in moderate traffic. He took the route that avoided the expressway because the morning merge was brutal at that hour, and Catherine said nothing about the choice, which he took as confirmation that she'd noticed and approved. They didn't speak the entire drive, but the quality of the silence was different that day. Heavier, more deliberate. He could feel it in the back of the car, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather comes. He pulled up to the main entrance of Mercy General and stopped. Catherine didn't get out. She sat with her hands folded and looked through the window at the automatic doors at the orderlies moving in and out at the patient being pushed in a wheelchair by a woman who might have been his daughter. Her face was doing the thing he'd come to recognize, that controlled, composed exterior with the eyes working independently, taking in everything, refusing to be still. 4 minutes. 5. Then quietly, almost like she was thinking out loud, rather than speaking to him. He was brought in through those doors. Marcus said nothing. His hands were on the wheel light and easy like they hadn't moved. "I was in London. A conference. Margaret called me at 2 in the morning. Another pause. He was gone before I landed. The sentence just sat there in the car between them. Marcus didn't try to fill it. He'd learned by now that Catherine Westbrook didn't say things because she wanted a response. She said them the way you set something heavy down for a moment. Not to give it away, just to rest your arms. "I'm sorry." She looked at the doors for another long minute. "Then drive." And he drove. She didn't speak again for the rest of the morning, but something had changed and they both knew it and neither of them mentioned it. And that was fine. That was the language they'd built between them without meaning to. The language of people who communicate in the things they don't say. Thursday was normal. Riverside and Morgan Lincoln Park back to the North Shore estate by noon. He spent his lunch break in the car in the garage eating a sandwich Sophie had helped him pack that morning. She'd drawn a small star on the paper bag in purple crayon. He set it on the passenger seat where he could see it. He was still looking at the star when Margaret knocked on the driver's side window. He rolled it down. "She's asking for you." "For me." He checked his watch. He had 40 minutes before the afternoon pickup was scheduled. "She wants to see you in the study." Her expression gave away nothing, which in Marcus's experience meant she was working hard to give away nothing. He folded up the paper bag, got out of the car, and followed her inside. The study was in the east wing, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and the kind of heavy, expensive quiet that only happens in rooms where a great deal of serious thought has historically taken place. Catherine was standing at the window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She turned when he came in. "Sit down." He sat. She stayed standing. He was beginning to recognize this as her default position when she was about to say something she'd been thinking about for a while. "My son started a project in 2019. You may or may not be aware of it." He kept his expression neutral. "I'm not familiar with the details." It was a half-truth, and he suspected she knew it was a half-truth, but she accepted it. He called it the South Side Renewal Initiative. 5 years of work. Site surveys, community consultations, design plans. He wanted to build something that actually served the neighborhood instead of replacing it. She said this without sentiment, reporting it the way you report a fact, but her grip on the teacup tightened slightly. He died before a single brick was laid. Marcus waited. The board moved on the property 6 weeks after the funeral. I signed the approvals. She said it plainly without apology, and somehow that was worse than if she'd been defensive about it. At the time I believed, or told myself I believed, that it was practical. That sentiment was a luxury I didn't have. That Jonathan would have understood. A beat. I'm less certain of that now. She turned back to the window. "I'm telling you this because you drive me to those locations every day and you have never once asked why. In my experience, people who don't ask questions are either incurious or patient. You are not incurious. No, ma'am. So you figured it out. Some of it. She turned and looked at him. What do you know about the Riverside project? He met her eyes. I know it's a large-scale development in the South Side. I know the timeline puts Phase 1 demolition sometime in spring. And he held her gaze. I live there. The room went very quiet. Catherine's expression didn't change. Not on the surface. But he saw it. That hairline shift behind the eyes. The same one he'd seen in the car on Friday when she'd said, I'm sorry, and meant it. Your apartment? Yes. Your daughter's school, 2 streets over. She set the teacup down on the windowsill with a precision that suggested it was taking effort to do it that carefully. Why didn't you tell me this when you were hired? It wasn't relevant to the job, and it still isn't. Unless you decide to make it relevant. She looked at him for a long moment. That's either very principled or very calculated. Could be both. I'm a practical man. Something moved across her face that was not a smile and was not a smile. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. She picked the teacup back up, looked at it rather than at him. I'll expect you at 8:15 tomorrow. He stood. Yes, ma'am. He was halfway to the door when she said, Mr. Hayes. He turned. The park bench. She was still looking at the teacup. Jonathan used to sit there on Sunday mornings when he was doing his site surveys. He said it was the best spot in the whole South Side to see what the neighborhood actually was, rather than what everyone argued about it being. She paused. He was usually right about things like that. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment. He sounds like he was a remarkable person. Catherine didn't respond to that, but she nodded once very slightly, and that was enough. He walked back out through the house and down to the garage and got in the car and sat there with Sophie's paper bag with the purple star on it. And he thought about a 36-year-old man sitting on a park bench in Riverside on Sunday mornings, seeing something in a neighborhood that everyone else was either ignoring or planning to demolish. He thought about Sophie's school, about Mr. Omar's butterscotch candies, about the woman 3 floors above him who had brought food every week for 2 months after Sarah died, who didn't even know his name, just knocked and left it and went back upstairs. He thought about what it cost to stay silent. He thought about what it cost not to. He put the car in park and stayed there until his 40-minute lunch break was over. And then he drove Catherine to her afternoon appointments without saying a word about any of it. But when he got home that evening, and Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table with her tongue pressed to her top lip the way she always did when she was concentrating, he stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment and watched her. She looked up, held up her sketchbook. She'd drawn the 2 of them again. His stick figure, her stick figure. But this time she'd added something. A 3rd figure smaller to the side. Beside it she'd written a question mark. He crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. Who's that pointing at the small figure? Sophie looked at him, looked at the drawing, picked up her pencil, and wrote slowly beneath the figure, turning the book so he could read it. The quiet lady in the big house. He stared at that for a second. He hadn't told Sophie anything about Catherine Westbrook, except that he had a new job driving someone around the city. How do you know about her? Sophie gave him the particular look that 7-year-olds give their parents when they find the question slightly insulting. Then she wrote, You look different when you talk about work now. Less tired. He read that twice. I still look tired. She shook her head, firmly. Wrote, Different tired. Thinking tired, not sad tired. He leaned back in his chair and looked at his daughter. This small, perceptive, entirely silent person who read him better than most adults he'd known his entire life. She's complicated. She's been through a lot. Sophie nodded slowly, like that made complete sense. Like complicated people who had been through a lot were the only kind of people worth drawing in the margins. She turned to a fresh page and started a new sketch. He stayed at the table and watched her draw, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like the macaroni he'd made earlier. And outside the window, the Riverside evening was doing what it always did. Neighbors calling to each other. Someone's music from an upstairs window. the particular noise of a neighborhood that had figured out how to be alive even when the city wasn't paying attention to it. He thought, someone tried to build something beautiful here. And then he died. He thought, and the woman who could still build it drives through these streets every day, carrying his name like a stone she can't put down. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with all of that. He was a driver. He drove. He kept his eyes on the road and his mouth closed, and he did his job, and he went home to his daughter, and he was grateful for every day that the lights stayed on. But something was shifting in him, slow and tectonic, the way things shift when you stop being able to pretend you don't know what you know. He wasn't there yet, but he was getting there. The following Monday, he picked up Catherine at 8:14 as always. She came out of the side entrance, got in, door closed. He pulled out of the driveway. They made it 4 blocks before she spoke. "I've been reviewing the Riverside project files." Her voice was even. "Jonathan's original designs, the community surveys, his correspondence with the neighborhood associations." A pause. "I hadn't looked at them since the funeral." "What made you look now?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. "You did, Mr. Hayes." He didn't ask what that meant. He thought he knew. "Were they what you expected?" She thought about the question seriously, the way she did everything. "No, they were better." That was all she said about it. She directed him to Riverside and Morgan, and they sat at the curb, and she looked at the empty lot where her son had once stood, with blueprints and a vision and a Sunday morning and the whole future still ahead of him. Marcus sat in the driver's seat and looked at the same corner and thought about a man he'd never met, who had believed in a neighborhood that had never made anyone's list of priorities, and who had been right about it the way that people are only right when they're paying attention with their whole chest. He thought, someone has to say something. He thought, not yet, but soon. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Not a utility notice this time, not a past due bill with a disconnect date stamped in red. This one came in a white envelope with the city seal in the upper left corner and the words Office of Municipal Development printed beneath it in clean official type. Marcus found it in the mailbox when he got home from dropping Catherine at the estate, still in his driving clothes, still carrying the particular quiet of a day spent in her company. He stood in the hallway of his building and opened it. Dear resident, please be advised that the property located at 615 to 680 Riverside Avenue and surrounding parcels have been approved for redevelopment under the Riverside Revitalization Initiative, a partnership between Westbrook Development Group and the City of Chicago. Current occupants of affected residential units will receive formal relocation notices no later than February 28th. Relocation assistance is available through the city's Housing Transition Program. For questions, contact. He stopped reading. He folded the letter in half, then in quarters. Then he stood in the hallway for a long moment with the folded letter in his hand and the building making its usual sounds around him. Someone's television upstairs. The pipes ticking. Mrs. Rosa Vega from 2A coming through the stairwell door with her grocery bags and stopping when she saw his face. You got one too? She was holding an identical white envelope already opened, creased from being read more than once. Yeah. She looked at him for a moment. This woman who had lived in this building for 22 years, who had brought a casserole dish to his door the week Sarah died, and then came back 3 days later to collect the dish and left a second one in its place without saying a word about it. What are we going to do? He didn't have an answer. I don't know yet. Which was the truth, and she nodded like it was the right thing to say, and they went upstairs separately. He put the letter on the kitchen table and made dinner. Sophie came in from the living room, saw his face, and sat across from him with her sketchbook open, but her pencil still. She watched him cook. She did that sometimes. Just watched him quiet and steady, the way a person sits with someone they love when they can tell that talking would be the wrong thing and presence is the right one. He put the plate in front of her, sat down. We might have to move. She looked at him. Not for sure. Not yet. But maybe. He kept his voice even because she read his voice the way other kids read faces, and he didn't want to hand her his fear. I'm working on it. Sophie picked up her pencil, wrote slowly, turned the book to face him. Is it because of the quiet lady? He read it twice, thought about how to answer honestly without handing her something she didn't need to carry. It's because of her company. She might not know yet how it affects us specifically. Sophie looked at him with those dark, careful eyes. Wrote again. Are you going to tell her? He looked at his daughter, 7 years old. Selective mutism and the wisdom of someone who had already survived more loss than most kids her age and come out the other side still drawing stick figures with small smiles. Yeah, I am. She nodded once, like that settled it, like the only question had ever been whether he was going to do it, not whether he should. He thought about that all through dinner and through the dishes and through the hour he sat at the kitchen table after Sophie was in bed, the city letter unfolded in front of him, reading it again, even though he had it memorized. February 28th. Relocation notices. That was 4 months away. Sophie's school year ended in June. Moving her mid-year, mid-therapy, mid-everything. He knew what that would cost her, not in money. In the other currency that kids pay when their world gets rearranged before they're ready for it. He thought about Catherine Westbrook sitting at that bench with her son's name on it. He thought about Jonathan's blueprints and community surveys and 5 years of work and a vision for this neighborhood that had died with him. He thought about the board that had moved on the property 6 weeks after the funeral and the signatures that had made it all legal, and the woman who had signed them and then spent the next 2 years driving through Riverside every single day like she was trying to understand something she couldn't undo. He thought, she doesn't know, or she knows, and she hasn't connected it, or she's connected it, and she doesn't know what to do with the connection. He didn't know which of those was true. He was going to find out. Thursday morning, 8:14. Catherine came out of the side entrance, got in, door closed. He pulled out of the driveway. He made it 6 blocks. Miss Westbrook. She looked up from the window. The use of her name instead of silence was apparently significant. She gave him her full attention in a way she rarely did. I received a letter yesterday, from the city, about the Riverside project. A pause. What kind of letter? A relocation notice. Pre-notification. He kept his voice level. My building is in the demolition zone. Phase 1. Silence in the back seat. He could feel her thinking. Not the social kind of thinking, not the performance of concern, but actual cognitive processing. Fast and private. You own or rent. How long have you been there? 3 years. Moved in the year before my wife got sick. Another pause. Longer this time. I wasn't aware your building was in phase 1. And then before he could respond, that is not a defense. I'm stating a fact. I know. I approved the project parameters in March. I didn't review the individual parcel breakdowns. That was... She stopped. That was a choice I made. A deliberate one. I didn't want the details. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was looking at her hands. Why not? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she'd decided not to answer. Then, because I knew that if I looked at the details, I'd see Jonathan's fingerprints on all of it. Every block he surveyed, every building he documented, every family he interviewed. Her voice was controlled but thinner than usual, like the composure was costing more than normal. It was easier not to know. Easier. And he kept his voice neutral, kept the judgment out of it because this was not the moment to push, and he knew it. Yes, easier. And wrong. I know that. He pulled up to the corner of Riverside and Morgan, cut the engine, let the silence sit for a moment. Then, my daughter's name is Sophie. She's 7. She stopped talking 14 months ago when her mother died. She has a therapist she's been seeing for 8 months, 4 blocks from her school. She's just started making progress. He paused. Her school is 2 streets from my building. Both of them are in phase 1. Catherine didn't say anything for a long moment. How many families are in phase 1? The notice said the affected parcels include 4 residential buildings. I don't know the exact number of units. I do. Or I should. She paused. 87 units. The numbers sat in the car between them. Jonathan knew those numbers too. He put them in his proposal. He cited them as the reason the renewal initiative had to be built around preservation, not demolition. Another pause. And this one had weight in it. The weight of something being recognized for the first time in a form that couldn't be managed. He would have hated this project. Did you know that when you approved it? It was a harder question than anything he'd said before. He felt the risk of it, the possible end of the job, the possible end of everything he'd built in these weeks. He asked it anyway. Catherine looked at the empty lot across the street at the corner where her son had stood with blueprints and a vision on Sunday mornings. Yes, I knew. He let that sit. Then, why, she turned and looked at him in the rearview mirror. And for the first time since he'd taken this job, Catherine Westbrook looked something other than composed. She looked like a woman who was very tired of carrying something very heavy and had run out of places to put it down. Because when he died, everything he believed in felt like the thing I couldn't have, like looking directly at it would make the loss unbearable. And I had a company to run and a board to manage and shareholders to answer to. And grief is not a strategy, Mr. Hayes. Grief is not a business plan. She turned back to the window. So I buried it, under 87 families. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. Yes, it came out very small, under 87 families. He started the car. He drove her to Lincoln Park and she sat at Jonathan's bench for 15 minutes instead of the usual 9. And when she came back she was not composed and she didn't try to be. She got in the car and sat in silence, and he could see in the mirror that she was somewhere far away from the back seat of a Mercedes, somewhere inside a calculation that had been running on incomplete data for 2 years and had just received a new variable that changed every answer. He drove her back to the North Shore estate. At the gate she said, "I need to make some calls." "Yes, ma'am." She got out, walked toward the house, stopped with her hand on the door and turned back. The letter, February 28th. Pre-notification. The actual notice comes after. She looked at him for a moment. "I'm going to need you to drive me somewhere tomorrow. Somewhere I haven't been in 2 years. We're Jonathan's office. We kept it exactly as he left it. I haven't been able to go in." She paused. "I think it's time." He nodded. 8:15. She went inside. He sat in the car in the driveway for a long moment. Then he pulled out through the gate and drove back across the city to pick up Sophie from school. She was waiting at the chain-link fence at the edge of the schoolyard, her backpack on her sketchbook clutched to her chest the way she always carried it. She saw him coming, and her face did the thing it did. Not a full smile. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But something that was working toward one. A kind of warmth that gathered in her eyes before it got anywhere near her mouth. He crouched down to her level. How was today? She opened the sketchbook. She'd drawn the classroom with all the desks. At her desk in the drawing, her stick figure had a speech bubble above it. The speech bubble had a word in it. "Hi." He stared at that. "You said hi, out loud." She looked at him, bit her lip, gave him the smallest, most careful nod he'd ever seen. "To who?" She pointed to another desk in the drawing, another stick figure. Beside it she'd written, "New Girl." He sat back on his heels and looked at his daughter. And the thing that moved through his chest right then was so large and quiet and overwhelming that he didn't have a word for it. He thought maybe it was the sound of a door opening very slightly in a room that had been sealed for too long. Sophie. And his voice did the thing it sometimes did when it ran out of room. "That's really good." She shrugged like it was not a big deal, like she hadn't just crossed a distance that had taken 14 months to get to the edge of. He picked her up and held her, and she tolerated it for a full 4 seconds before patting his shoulder in the way she patted him when she thought he was being excessive. And he set her down, and they walked to the car, holding hands. On the way home he thought about what he'd said to Catherine and what Catherine had said back. He thought about 87 families and the way she'd repeated it, the way a number can stop being a number and start being a weight. He thought about Jonathan's office kept exactly as it was untouched for 2 years. He thought about doors. Some of them apparently opened when you least expected it. That evening he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Hayes." A male voice polished the particular smoothness of someone who got paid to be smooth. "My name is Richard Garrison. I'm the Executive Vice President of Development at Westbrook Development Group." Marcus said nothing. waited. "I understand you've been in Miss Westbrook's employment for approximately 3 weeks. I also understand that you had a conversation with her today of a personal nature regarding your residential situation." "I did. I want to be direct with you. Miss Westbrook is a remarkable woman who has been through an extraordinary amount of personal difficulty. Sometimes people in positions of care around her driver's staff can develop a certain investment in her decisions, a certain influence that frankly benefits them more than her." He paused. "I'm calling to remind you of the nature of your employment. Your role is transportation, Mr. Hayes. Not consultation. Miss Westbrook can decide what my role is. That's between her and me. The Riverside project represents a $400 million development, and the smoothness dropped a fraction. Just a fraction. The municipal approvals are in place. The architectural plans are finalized. The contractors are on standby. One driver's difficult personal circumstances do not constitute grounds for significant business reversal. No, they don't." A beat of silence. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other. I don't think we do. I'm not trying to change her business decisions. I'm not lobbying for anything. I told her the truth about where I live because she asked me directly and because she deserved to know it. That's all." He paused. "Now, if Miss Westbrook decides on her own that the truth changes something for her, that's her choice. And she's the one who runs the company, Mr. Garrison. Not me." Silence on the line. Then, very precisely, "You should be careful, Mr. Hayes. I'm a driver. I'm always careful." He hung up. He put the phone face down on the table and sat with the adrenaline for a moment. Then he got up and washed the dishes and checked on Sophie and sat on the edge of her bed while she slept and thought about what careful actually meant. It didn't mean silence. He knew that now. He'd been careful for 3 weeks. Careful with his words, careful with his eyes, careful not to want too much from a situation that had saved his financial life. And careful had been the right call for 3 weeks because you had to build something before you could stand on it. But careful in the long run was not the same thing as quiet, and quiet was not the same thing as honest. And at some point, and he was feeling that point approaching the way you feel a curve in the road before you see it, honest was the only thing that was going to matter. He thought about Garrison's phone call. The fact that it came within hours of his conversation with Catherine meant she'd said something to someone, or that someone had been watching closely enough to know the conversation had happened. Either way, there was pressure building somewhere in the Westbrook Development Group structure, and he was apparently visible enough to be worth a phone call. He didn't know yet if that was good or bad. He thought about Jonathan Westbrook and his community surveys, and his Sunday mornings on a park bench in Riverside, and the blueprints that were sitting in an untouched office 2 years after the man who drew them stopped breathing. He thought, that office exists for a reason. He thought, tomorrow she's going to open the door. He thought, be there when she does. Friday morning came cold and gray, the kind of November morning that presses down on a city like a thumb. He pulled through this gate at 7:50. Margaret was standing at the side entrance with coffee in a travel mug and an expression that had shed its usual professional neutrality and replaced it with something more unguarded. She didn't sleep. She was in the library until 3. She's been up since 5:30. Margaret handed him the coffee like she was handing him something she needed him to carry for her. She hasn't been to that office in 26 months. I know. She trusts you. It came out like a fact and like a plea at the same time. I don't know how that happened in 3 weeks, but it did. So whatever you do in that building today, she stopped. Just don't break it. I won't. Catherine came out at 8:15. She was in her dark coat, same as every day, but she was holding something. A single key on a plain ring. Old brass. The kind of key that belongs to a room that hasn't been opened in a long time. She held it in her right hand the entire walk to the car. She got in, door closed. A long moment of silence. Westbrook Tower. Employee parking entrance, 6th floor. He pulled out. They drove across the city in the particular quiet that had become their shared language, but today it had a different texture. Not the comfortable, settled quiet of the past weeks. This one had edges to it. This one was the quiet of someone breathing through something they'd been avoiding for 26 months. At the building, he took her to the employee entrance as directed, rode up in the elevator without being invited but without being asked to stay behind either. She walked through the 6th floor, her executive team watching her from behind glass walls with the careful attention of people who know something significant is happening and have been told to say nothing about it, to a door at the end of the hall. Jonathan's name was still on it. Jonathan Westbrook, Vice President, Community Development. Catherine stood in front of that door and held the brass key and did not move. Marcus stood beside her. Not behind her, not at a respectful distance. Beside her. Close enough that if she needed something solid to stand next to, he was there. She put the key in the lock. She turned it. She pushed the door open. The room smelled like him. That was the first thing. She breathed in just once, quick and controlled, like someone testing whether the air was safe. And then her hand found the door frame and held it. And for just a moment she was not a billionaire developer or a CEO or a woman who had spent 2 years building walls around a wound. She was just a mother standing in her dead son's doorway. Marcus stayed where he was. He didn't move forward, didn't step back. He was just there. The same way he was always there. Present, quiet, steady in the particular way that had apparently made 7 other men seem loud by comparison. Catherine walked in. The desk was exactly as Jonathan had left it. Papers in organized stacks. A coffee mug empty clean, someone had washed it, sitting on a coaster printed with the city skyline. A framed photo on the corner of the desk. Jonathan and Catherine at what looked like a groundbreaking ceremony. Both of them in hard hats. Jonathan grinning like a man who had just been told the best news of his life. Catherine in the photo was smiling too, not the controlled, managed expression she wore like a second skin now, but a real smile, the kind that takes over your whole face before you can decide how much of it you want to show. She looked at the photo for a long time, then she walked to the drafting table along the wall. The blueprints were still there, rolled and labeled in Jonathan's handwriting, sorted by block and by phase. Beside them a corkboard covered in survey notes, community feedback cards, hand-drawn sketches of building facades with annotations in the margins, photos pinned to the board. Residents, storefronts, the Lincoln Park bench, the corner of Riverside and Morgan shot from the sidewalk with morning light coming across it. Marcus stepped inside the room slowly and stood near the door. He looked at the corkboard. He looked at the photos. He recognized Mr. Omar's bodega in one of them. He recognized the building where Mrs. Vega had lived for 22 years. Catherine reached out and touched one of the rolled blueprints without picking it up. Just touched it like she was checking whether it was real. He had a name for this building. The Community Center. He never told the board, said he'd announce it at the groundbreaking. But he told me. She paused. He wanted to call it the Riverside Center, after the street. Because he said the whole point was that it belonged to the neighborhood, not to us. Marcus said nothing. He was so certain. That was the thing about Jonathan. He was never arrogant. He listened more than anyone I've ever known. But he was certain about what these people deserved, about what this company could be if we chose to let it be that. She picked up the photo of the 2 of them in hard hats and held it. I used to think his certainty was naive. I was wrong about that. What changed your mind? She set the photo down. You. Plainly. You and what you told me yesterday. Not because your situation is not because it's a business argument. It isn't. It's the opposite of a business argument. She turned to face him. You sat in that car and told me about your daughter and her silence and her school. And you said it like you were handing me a fact that I needed to have. No accusation, no leverage. Just the truth because I deserved to have it. She paused. Jonathan used to do that. He had a gift for making people feel that the truth was a thing they were being given rather than a thing being used against them. When you're in power, is ignorance really an excuse or just a choice? You're describing a good man. He was the best person I've ever known. And her voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically, not with any performance in it, just cleanly, the way a clean thing breaks. She pressed her lips together and looked back at the corkboard, and Marcus looked away to give her the moment Because some things you don't witness, you just hold space for. After a moment, Mr. Hayes, I want you to look at something. She unrolled the largest blueprint on the drafting table, weighing the corners with 2 books and the coffee mug. It was a site plan. The riverside blocks laid out in detailed architectural drawing annotated in Jonathan's small, precise handwriting. Come here. He crossed the room and stood beside her at the table. She pointed to a block near the center of the plan. This is where the current development project has its largest footprint. 6 existing residential buildings demolished. Premium mixed-use units here, here, and here. Her finger moved across the paper. Underground parking, retail on the ground floor, market rate and above. I know that plan. Now look at this. She slid a second blueprint out from beneath the first. Older, the paper slightly different, a project number from 2 years ago in the corner. She unrolled it over the first one. Same blocks. Jonathan's version. Marcus looked. The buildings were still there in Jonathan's plan, not demolished. Renovated. The footprint was similar, but the approach was inverted. Affordable housing preservation first, new construction filling the gaps between existing structures rather than replacing them. The community center sat at the center of the plan, anchored on the corner of Riverside and Morgan, designed to serve as the hub of the whole initiative. He spent 8 months getting the numbers to work. The profit margin was lower, not absent lower. He argued to the board that long-term community investment created returns that a demolition rebuild model couldn't replicate. Goodwill stability reduced community resistance, company reputation that attracted better partners. She paused. They didn't buy it. What did Jonathan say? He said they would. He said he needed 1 more year to refine the financial model and present it again. Her voice was steady but thin. He didn't have a year. Marcus stood at the drafting table looking at 2 versions of the same neighborhood laid over each other, one that preserved it and one that erased it. And he thought about Garrison's phone call last night, the $400 million development, the contractors on standby. He thought about how those numbers had probably been part of the board conversation that had happened 6 weeks after Jonathan's funeral, when a grieving woman had signed approvals without reading the parcel breakdowns because the details were too close to her son's handwriting to look at. Is it too late? Legally, contractually, is there a point where it can't be reversed? Catherine looked at him. Why are you asking that? Because Garrison called me last night. The room got very still. He called you at home, on my personal number. He told me my role was transportation, not consultation. He suggested that I had developed an inappropriate influence over your decisions. He said the project represents $400 million and that one driver's difficult personal circumstances don't constitute grounds for a business reversal. Catherine's expression moved through something he couldn't fully read. Not surprise. Not quite. More like the confirmation of something she'd suspected. He used those exact words. He did. How did you respond? I told him that whatever decisions you made were yours to make, and that my job was to tell you the truth, not to lobby for outcomes. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then, he shouldn't have called you. No, he shouldn't have. He's been managing this project since the beginning. He was the one who brought it to the board after she stopped. He was the one who built the case for the current plan. He did it efficiently, professionally, and he brought in excellent numbers. She paused. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew Jonathan's plan existed. Everyone on the board knew. They'd voted it down twice. When Jonathan died, Richard moved quickly. She said it without drama, without heat, just with the flat precision of someone who had just finished assembling a picture they'd been looking at in pieces for 2 years. I was in no condition to scrutinize the timeline, and now Catherine looked back at the 2 blueprints layered on the table. She put her hand on Jonathan's version, the one that kept the buildings, kept the families, put a community center on the corner of Riverside and Morgan instead of luxury condominiums. Now I'm scrutinizing it. She pulled out her phone and made a call. 2 rings. Margaret, I need the full Riverside contract documentation on my desk by 2. Every schedule, every contingency clause, every termination provision. A pause. And I need the original board minutes from April, the meeting where the current plan was approved. Another pause. Yes, today. She hung up. She looked at Marcus. You asked if it was too late. Yes. The Phase 1 demolition contracts have a 60-day termination window. We're currently at day 41 since execution. He did the math. 19 days. 19 days. After that, the penalties become prohibitive. Not impossible, prohibitive. What are you going to do? Catherine. Westbrook looked at her son's blueprints, at the small, precise handwriting in the margins, at the photos pinned to the corkboard at the corner of Riverside and Morgan, in the photograph with morning light falling across it like an invitation. I'm going to do what I should have done 2 years ago. I'm going to read every word of what my son built. She paused. And then I'm going to call a board meeting. He drove her back to the estate that afternoon in silence, but it was a different silence than any they'd had before. Not the silence of two people managing distance. The silence of two people who had in the space of a morning moved from one side of something to the other and were still taking stock of where they'd landed. At the gate she stopped with her hand on the door. Tell me about her. Ma'am, Sophie. Tell me something about her. Something real. He thought for a moment. She communicates in drawings. Has since she stopped talking. She carries a sketchbook everywhere and draws what she means instead of saying it. He paused. She drew you. Catherine turned and looked at him fully. She drew me. She drew a figure and labeled it the quiet lady in the big house. She'd figured out from my expressions that something had changed at work. He paused. She asked me if I was going to tell you about the letter. What did you say? I said yes. Catherine was quiet for a moment. She told you to. She asked me if I was going to. There's a difference. She doesn't tell me what to do. She just asks the question she already knows the answer to, and then looks at me with those eyes until I catch up. Something moved across Catherine's face. Not quite a smile, but the kind of warmth that exists in the place where smiles come from. She sounds like Jonathan. He did exactly that. He'd ask you a question and then wait while you worked out what you already knew. She got out of the car, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle. Mr. Hayes. Yes, ma'am. The community surveys Jonathan conducted the interviews with residents. The feedback from the neighborhood association meetings, they're in the files in his office. She paused. I'd like you to read them. He frowned slightly. Me? You live there. You know those streets better than anyone in my organization. If I'm going to walk into a board meeting and make the case Jonathan couldn't finish making, I want someone in the room who actually knows what we're talking about. She met his eyes. I want you there. He looked at her for a moment. I'm a driver. You're more than that. You've been more than that since day one, and we both know it. The question is whether you're willing to be useful in a different capacity for the next 19 days. He thought about Garrison, about $400 million, about a boardroom full of people who had voted down Jonathan's plan twice and moved on the project 6 weeks after his funeral. You understand what Garrison will do? Yes. He'll come at your judgment. He'll say your grief is affecting your decisions. He'll say, I'm a conflict of interest, a driver with personal stakes in the outcome. He'll say all of that. And he'll be partially right, which is what makes it dangerous. She paused. But Jonathan's financial model was sound. The numbers hold. The community support data is extensive, and the termination window is still open. She looked at him steadily. I don't need sympathy to win this argument. I need facts, and I need someone who knows the ground. Then read the files first. Read every word of what Jonathan built, and then decide if you want me in that room. She nodded once. 8:15 tomorrow. He drove home. He picked Sophie up from school. She ran the last few steps to him, which she'd started doing again recently. Small things returning, the way sensation returns to a limb that has been asleep. He held her hand on the walk to the car and thought about 19 days and $400 million and a boardroom he'd never been in and a woman who was spending tonight reading her dead son's work for the first time. That evening his phone rang again. Different number this time. He almost didn't pick up. Mr. Hayes. A woman's voice, older, formal. My name is Patricia Quinn. I'm the director of the Riverside Neighborhood Association. I was given your number by Margaret Cross at Westbrook Development. A pause. She said you might be someone worth talking to. Go ahead, Ms. Quinn. We received the pre-notification letters 3 days ago. 87 units, 4 buildings, plus 2 small businesses on Riverside Corner. We've been trying to get a meeting with Westbrook Development for 6 weeks. We've been told the project is finalized and community consultation is no longer in scope. That's what you were told. Yes. A beat. Miss Cross suggested that situation might be changing. She suggested the next 48 hours were significant. Another pause. Is that true? Marcus looked at the city letter still on the table. He thought about Catherine standing at Jonathan's drafting table, her hand flat on his blueprints. I think it might be. I can't make you promises, but I think the next 2 weeks matter more than the last 2 years. Silence on the line. Then, what do you need from us? Jonathan Westbrook spent 5 years doing community surveys in your neighborhood. He interviewed residents, documented the history of those buildings, collected data on community use patterns. Do you know about that? Of course. He came to our association meetings. He listened. We gave him everything he asked for. Her voice tightened. And then he died, and the company sent a different man who told us the plan had changed. That work still exists. The surveys, the interviews, the data, it's all still in his office. He paused. If there's going to be a board meeting in the next 2 weeks, and if there's any chance of this project changing course, that community documentation is going to be part of the argument, I want to make sure the people it's about are part of that conversation. The silence on the other end of the line was different now. Longer. Heavier with something that might have been hope, which is one of the most dangerous things to feel when you've already been disappointed. Tell me what to do. He talked to her for 40 minutes. He wrote things down on the back of the city letter. He asked her about specific buildings, specific families, specific history, the kind of ground-level detail that doesn't make it into project briefs, but makes everything real. When he hung up, Sophie was standing in the kitchen doorway in her fox pajamas, sketchbook in hand. He looked at her. You should be in bed. She held up the sketchbook. She'd drawn the corkboard from Jonathan's office. He hadn't described it to her, but somehow she'd drawn something that looked remarkably like it. Papers, photos, strings connecting things. And in the center, where all the strings converged, she'd drawn 2 stick figures standing side by side. Beneath them, she'd written, Sometimes 2 quiet people are louder than everyone else. He stared at that for a long moment. How do you do that? She shrugged, turned and padded back to bed. He sat at the kitchen table for another hour, looking at her drawing, thinking about a boardroom and a 19-day window, and a woman who had spent tonight reading her son's handwriting for the first time in 26 months. He thought about what Margaret had said. She trusts you. Don't break it. He thought about what Garrison had said. You should be careful. He thought about what Sophie had said in her own way, which was always the clearest way. He thought 19 days. He thought don't waste them. Catherine called the board meeting for a Thursday. She gave them 6 days' notice, enough to be professional, not enough to let Garrison build a full counter-offensive. Marcus knew the timing was deliberate because Catherine Westbrook did not do anything without intention. In the 11 days between opening Jonathan's office and the morning of the meeting, she had read every page of her son's work. Every survey, every community interview, every financial projection and feasibility note and margin calculation that Jonathan had spent 5 years refining in that room with his name still on the door. Marcus knew because she told him. Not all at once, not in any structured way, in the way that people tell things to someone they've stopped performing for. In the car between destinations, in the particular quiet that had become something else entirely over the past weeks. She would say something and he would respond and they would let it sit. And it didn't feel like a driver and his employer anymore. It felt like 2 people who had found in the most unlikely circumstances that they were fluent in the same unspoken language. He interviewed a woman named Clara Mitchell, Monday morning 4 days before the board meeting. 71 years old. She's lived in the same apartment on Riverside for 43 years. She raised 4 children in that building. Her daughter lives 2 floors above her now. Catherine paused. Jonathan spent 2 hours with her. He wrote 6 pages of notes. I know Mrs. Mitchell. She has a garden on her fire escape. Tomatoes in the summer. Catherine was quiet for a moment. He noted the garden. He wrote, she tends it every morning at 6. It's the first thing she does. He said it told him everything he needed to know about what those buildings meant to the people inside them. Marcus looked in the mirror. Catherine was looking at her hands. I called her. He kept his voice even. You called Mrs. Mitchell. Yesterday evening. I found her number through the Neighborhood Association contact list Patricia Quinn sent over. A pause. She didn't know who I was at first. When I told her, she was quiet for a very long time. And then she said, Catherine's voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. She said, your son was a good man. He looked at my tomato plants and he understood. She cried. A brief stop. I cried too. I haven't done that. Not since the funeral. I hadn't been able to. Marcus just drove. I think I needed to hear someone else say his name like that. Like he mattered to people I never met. Like he did what he set out to do, even if the building never got built. She looked out the window. He got through to people. That was always his gift. It's yours too. You just stopped using it for a while. She looked up at the mirror. He felt it before he saw it. That's a bold thing to say to your employer. You told me to be useful. That's me being useful. A silence, then something that was unmistakably the sound of Catherine Westbrook almost laughing. Not quite. Not all the way. But close enough that he counted it. Patricia Quinn delivered everything Marcus had asked for by Tuesday. The Neighborhood Association had kept records of Jonathan's community meetings. Sign-in sheets, minutes, feedback forms, photographs. 22 residents had written personal statements when they heard the project might be reconsidered. Statements that Patricia had organized and formatted and delivered in a bound folder that Marcus left on Margaret's desk without ceremony. Margaret called him 20 minutes later. She's been reading them since 9 this morning. She missed her 11 o'clock call. A pause. I've been her assistant for 18 years, Mr. Hayes. She has never missed an 11 o'clock call. Wednesday night, the night before the board meeting, Marcus was at the kitchen table going over the notes he'd compiled. Building histories, residency data, community use patterns from Jonathan's surveys cross-referenced with what he knew from living there. His phone rang. Catherine, are you ready for tomorrow? Yes. Garrison is going to challenge your presence in the room. He'll say you're a conflict of interest. He may try to have you removed before I can present. What do you want me to do if he tries? Stay in your seat. I'll handle Richard. All right? A pause. Mr. Hayes, I want to be clear about something. Her voice had the particular precision it got when she was about to say something she'd been arranging in her mind for a while. Whatever happens tomorrow, if the board votes against the revision, if the termination window closes, if none of this works, I want you to know that I am not doing this for the company. I'm not doing it as a business calculation. I'm doing it because my son was right, and I have spent 2 years knowing he was right and doing nothing about it. And I don't intend to spend a third year the same way. And if the numbers convince them, the numbers are good. Jonathan's financial model is strong. Stronger than what Richard presented in April, actually. The community retention data reduces projected municipal friction costs significantly. It's a legitimate business case. A beat. But that's not why I'm doing it. I know you know. And then more quietly, how is Sophie? The question caught him slightly off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because of how natural it was, how easily it sat in the conversation like it belonged there. She said 3 words today, out loud. To her teacher. She wanted a different book from the shelf and she asked for it. Can I please have that book? Silence on the line for a moment. 3 words. Her therapist says the breakthrough is accelerating, that the consistency of her environment is a big part of what's making it possible. He paused. Stability matters, especially for kids who've already lost one anchor. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of what they both understood without having to arrange it into sentences. Get some rest. I'll see you at 8:15. The board meeting was at 10. He picked Catherine up at 8:14 as always. She came out of the side entrance in a dark charcoal suit he hadn't seen before, her silver hair precisely back, carrying the bound folder of community statements in one hand and Jonathan's revised financial model in the other. She looked like a woman who had made a decision at a cellular level and was now simply executing it. She got in. He closed the door, pulled out, nervous. It was the kind of question he wouldn't have asked a month ago. No. Then yes. But not about the vote. What then? I'm about to walk into a room full of people who have watched me grieve for 2 years without saying a single useful thing. And I'm going to tell them that I made a mistake, and my dead son was right, and we're going to do this differently. A pause. That requires a certain surrender of ego that I have historically found difficult. You've been practicing. Have I? 3 months of morning drives. You've been saying hard things out loud in this car. Getting comfortable with the sound of the truth before you have to say it in a room where it costs more. She looked at him for a long moment. You've been paying attention. I'm a driver. It's mostly what I do. This time she did laugh. Quietly, briefly, but fully. The real thing. The unmanaged thing. The laugh of a person who has been reminded that they are still capable of it. She looked out the window for the rest of the drive. He let her. The Westbrook Development Group boardroom was on the 14th floor. Glass-walled and designed to communicate seriousness. 8 people around the table when Marcus walked in behind Catherine. 6 board members. Margaret at the end with her laptop and Richard Garrison standing at the head of the room with the easy, planted confidence of a man who had decided in advance how this meeting was going to go. He looked at Marcus, and his expression did not change, which meant he'd been expecting him. Catherine. Garrison's voice was warm and measured. Before we start, I want to flag that we have a non-board member present. Given the sensitivity of today's discussion, Mr. Hayes is here at my invitation. Catherine sat down, set the folders on the table in front of her, and looked at Garrison with the calm, specific patience of someone who has been managing Richard Garrison for a very long time and is done pretending it requires effort. He stays. Let's begin. Garrison held her gaze for 1 beat. 2. Then he sat down. Catherine didn't ease into it. She didn't thank anyone for coming. Didn't do the social warm-up that business meetings run on. She opened the folder, set Jonathan's revised financial model on the table where everyone could see it. I want to talk about what we're building in Riverside. And I want to start by admitting that the plan currently on the table is wrong. The room was very still. I approved it in a state of grief without reading what I was approving. That was my failure. I'm not here to apologize for it because apologies without correction are just noise. I'm here to correct it. She slid copies of the financial model down the table. My son spent 5 years building an alternative. I have spent the last 11 weeks reading every word of it. The community engagement data is extensive, the financial projections are sound, and the case for revision is legitimate, not sentimental. Legitimate. She paused. The Phase 1 termination window closes in 8 days. I am asking this board to authorize the revision before that window closes. Garrison opened his copy of the document. His expression was professional, controlled, and Marcus could see him calculating in real time. The angles, the arguments, where Catherine was weak and where she wasn't. Catherine. Carefully. The current plan was approved unanimously. Contracts are executed. The community consultation period legally closed in September. Revisiting this at day 52 of a 60-day window is legal. I checked. Disruptive. To whom? A beat. To the contractors. To the municipal partners. To the financial projections this board agreed to. The financial projections in Jonathan's model outperform the current plan's projections at the 5-year mark and beyond. Page 7. The community retention analysis. The reduced municipal friction costs. The anchor tenant modeling for the Riverside Center. Catherine looked at him steadily. Richard, you've seen this model. You saw it twice before Jonathan died. You voted against it both times. She paused. I'm curious whether your objections then were financial or strategic. The room had a different kind of quiet. That's a significant accusation. It's a question. Answer it whenever you're ready. He didn't answer it. He turned to the financial model and raised 3 objections in quick succession. The contingency cost increases. The extended timeline. The reduced short-term yield. They were legitimate objections technically. The kind that sound like reason and feel like obstruction. Marcus sat against the wall and watched Catherine take each one apart with Jonathan's numbers, cleanly and without heat. And he thought, she's been practicing this too. Not in the car. In that office every night for 11 days. The board member on Catherine's left, a woman named Dr. Sandra Cole, who had said nothing, so far leaned forward. Can I ask about the community impact documentation? Community statements. 22 residents from the affected buildings compiled by the Riverside Neighborhood Association. Catherine passed copies around. This is what the current plan demolishes. I wanted the board to have names and faces, not just parcel numbers. Dr. Cole opened the folder, read for a moment. Her expression shifted, not dramatically but genuinely. Mrs. Clara Mitchell, 43 years. She has a garden on her fire escape, tomatoes in the summer. My son noted it in his survey. He said it told him everything he needed to know. Dr. Cole looked up. Around the table, 2 other board members were reading. The room had changed, the temperature of it, the weight of it. Numbers could be argued with. Clara Mitchell's 43 years was harder to argue with. Garrison made 2 more attempts. The second one, a pointed reference to Catherine's personal relationship to the project and the risk of emotionally driven decision-making, landed in the room like something thrown carelessly. Marcus watched 2 board members' expressions tighten in a way that told him it had hit wrong. Catherine looked at Garrison for a moment. Then very quietly, Richard, my son is dead. My grief is not a variable in this financial model. The numbers are the numbers. She paused. Mr. Hayes is here because he has first-hand knowledge of the community Jonathan spent 5 years documenting, knowledge that every analysis in this room is based on but none of you have directly experienced. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Hayes, would you share with the board what you told me about stability and children in disrupted environments? Marcus stood. He kept his voice steady. I've lived at 615 Riverside Avenue for 3 years. My daughter attends Washington Elementary 2 streets over. She's 7. 14 months ago, her mother died and she stopped speaking, a condition called selective mutism. Her therapist is 4 blocks from her school. 3 weeks ago, she spoke her first words since her mother's death. 3 words. To ask for a book. He paused, looked around the table. Her therapist says the breakthrough is happening because of environmental consistency. Same home, same school, same route, same neighbors. Stability. The current plan demolishes that stability for 87 families. Not just my daughter, 87 units. Mrs. Clara Mitchell, 43 years at that address, her daughter 2 floors above her. Mr. Deshaun Parker, who runs the community garden on the vacant lot you're planning to pave. The Rodriguez family, whose son is in Sophie's class. He looked at Garrison. You said I'm a conflict of interest. You're right. I have a conflict. But my conflict is the same conflict Jonathan Westbrook identified 5 years ago when he surveyed these families and concluded that a company with resources should build with a community, not instead of it. He looked at Catherine. The numbers in his model aren't just projections. They represent real people who've been there decades, who will be there decades more if we let them. That's not sentiment. That's data. He sat down. The room was silent. Catherine looked around the table. I'd like a vote. It was 5-1. Garrison was the one. Margaret typed. The revision was authorized. The Phase 1 demolition contracts would be terminated within the week. Jonathan's plan, adapted, refined, built on 5 years of his work and 11 weeks of his mother's, would go to the city planning office for revised approval by the end of the month. The Riverside Center built on the corner where it was always supposed to be built. His name, his vision, his Sunday mornings on a park bench. After the other board members filed out, Garrison stopped at the door. He looked at Marcus with an expression that had gone past anger into something that was trying to be dignity and not quite getting there. You're still just a driver. I know. I drove her here. Garrison left. Margaret appeared at Marcus's shoulder. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on his arm for exactly 2 seconds and then walked out after the others. Which was the most emotional he had ever seen Margaret cross, and he suspected it was the most emotional she would allow herself to be in a professional context. Catherine was still at the table alone, looking at the community statement folder. How do you feel? She thought about the question seriously. The way she did everything. Like I set something down that I've been carrying for 2 years. And like I should have set it down a long time ago. She paused. And like I'm sorry it took this long. For the families. For Jonathan. She looked at the folder. For myself. He'd be glad you did it. Yes. He would. She closed the folder, looked up. I want to offer you a position. Not a driving position, though you're welcome to keep that if you want it. I've learned to value silence in a car more than I can express. Something warm moved through her expression. I want you on the Riverside Center project as community liaison. You know those streets. You know those people. Patricia Quinn already trusts you. Mrs. Mitchell's daughter apparently mentioned you by name in her statement. She paused. Jonathan always said the biggest mistake in community development is hiring people who have to learn the community from a distance. You're not at a distance. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the $340, the utility notice in the junk drawer, the 47 applications and the 0 offers, and the job posting that had said no prior experience necessary, like it was barely worth mentioning. I don't have a background in development. Jonathan had a background in development. What he needed was someone who would tell him the truth about what he was building and who he was building it for. That's what you do, Mr. Hayes. You tell the truth. She met his eyes. The rest can be learned. He thought about Sophie. About 3 words said out loud to a teacher. About a sketchbook full of stick figures and small, careful sentences that were the truest things he'd ever read. He thought about Sarah and what she would have said about all of this. And he knew what she would have said because he'd known her well enough to know. And what she would have said was, take it. Take the thing that's real. Yes, I'll take it. Catherine stood, walked to the window. There was one more thing. She didn't turn around. Richard Garrison. 2 hours ago, I received documentation from our legal team confirming what I'd suspected for several weeks. Richard has a financial interest in Demolition Solutions, Inc., the primary contractor for Phase 1. The relationship predates Jonathan's death by 6 months. She turned to face Marcus. He stood to gain approximately $2 million in contractor fees from the current plan. That's why he moved so quickly after the funeral. That's why he's fought so hard today. Marcus absorbed that. What are you going to do? I've already done it. His employment was terminated at 2 this afternoon, effective immediately. For cause. Conflict of interest, failure to disclose material financial relationships, and she paused, breach of fiduciary duty to this company and to the memory of the person whose work he actively undermined. Justice served, not just for us, for Jonathan. She looked out the window at the city. He would have wanted the building more than the revenge, but I think he would have appreciated both. The groundbreaking for the Riverside Center was on a Saturday in April. The trees were starting to come back, and the corner of Riverside and Morgan had been cleared and set for the ceremony, and the whole neighborhood seemed to have turned out. Mrs. Mitchell in her good coat. Patricia Quinn with a folder of remarks she'd been writing for weeks. Kids from Washington Elementary standing in a cluster with handmade signs. Mr. Omar had closed the bodega for 2 hours and put a note in the window that said, "Be back soon. History is happening." Marcus stood near the back with Sophie on his shoulders so she could see over the crowd. She had her sketchbook open even up there, drawing as she watched. The crowd, the corner of the podium with the Westbrook Development Group seal, and the new Riverside Center logo that Jonathan had designed himself and never seen used. Catherine spoke at the podium. She spoke about Jonathan, not the way people speak about the dead at official functions, carefully and from a distance, but directly, specifically, the way you speak about someone you are still in conversation with. She talked about what he believed and what he built and what this corner of the city had meant to him on Sunday mornings with a cup of coffee and a set of blueprints and more certainty than anyone around him knew what to do with. She talked about the 87 families. She talked about Clara Mitchell's tomato garden. When she finished, the crowd was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't the absence of something but the presence of it. Then Patricia Quinn started clapping and the whole corner followed. Marcus felt Sophie grip his hair with both hands the way she did when she was excited and trying not to fall. He reached up and held her ankles. "You good up there?" She tapped the top of his head twice. "Yes." He looked up. She was still drawing her pencil, moving fast, trying to get all of it down before it changed. He caught a glimpse of the page, the crowd, the podium, Catherine at the microphone, and in the margin 2 stick figures standing in the middle of all of it, his and Catherine's. No labels this time. She didn't need to write who they were. After the ceremony, Catherine found him at the edge of the crowd. She was carrying a small paper bag, the kind from a bakery, tied with a bit of string. She held it out. For Sophie. Margaret said she likes butterscotch. He took the bag, looked at her. Catherine Westbrook, who had fired 7 drivers in 30 days and sat alone in her son's grief for 2 years and signed the wrong papers, and then, when the truth finally reached her, turned around and walked back toward it with everything she had. Thank you. And he meant it the way she had once meant it. Not performed, not social. Just the plain and total truth of it set carefully into the air between them. She nodded once, looked at Sophie, still up on his shoulders, still drawing. What is she drawing? He looked up again. Sophie turned the sketchbook so he could see. She'd drawn the corner, the whole thing, the crowd, the podium, the signs, the trees coming back. And in the center of the drawing, anchored on the corner of Riverside and Morgan, where Jonathan Westbrook had stood on Sunday mornings with his blueprints and his certainty and the whole future still open in front of him, she had drawn a building. Not the building as it existed yet. It was still a cleared lot, a groundbreaking, but the building as it would be, as it was always going to be from the moment a 36-year-old man sat on a park bench and looked at a neighborhood the way it deserved to be looked at. Above it, in Sophie's careful, serious 7-year-old handwriting, she had written 2 words. Finally home. Marcus looked at those words for a long time. He felt Catherine looking at them too. He felt the corner of Riverside and Morgan under the April sky, and the crowd around them and his daughter's weight on his shoulders, and the particular quality of a morning when something that was supposed to exist finally does. It makes you wonder, how many times do we choose comfort over what's right? How many voices do we ignore because listening would cost us something? Some jobs nobody wants turn out to be the only job that was ever meant for you. Some silences kept long enough and honestly enough become the loudest thing in the room. And some buildings, the ones built from grief and truth and the stubborn specific love of a person who believed a neighborhood deserved better, stand long after the people who built them are gone. Because that is what it means to build something real. Marcus Hayes had taken a job no one wanted, and it had not just changed his life, it had given him back the thing he hadn't known he was still looking for, the sense that the ground beneath his feet was worth standing on, that the people around him were worth fighting for, and that sometimes when you drive someone through the city long enough and honestly enough, you end up exactly where you were both always supposed to be. He held Sophie's ankles. She kept drawing. Catherine stood beside them in the April light. And on the corner of Riverside and Morgan, for the first time in 2 years, something was being built. Have you ever had to choose between keeping quiet and doing what's right? Have you ever watched someone in power make a decision that affected your life and wondered if they even knew you existed? Tell us your story in the comments. Have you ever been in Marcus's position or Catherine's? What would you have done? And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that one person's voice, one person's truth, can change everything. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the office that used to belong to Jonathan Westbrook and now had his name on the door. Marcus Hayes, Community Liaison. The corkboard was still there, but now it had new photos pinned to it. Construction progress shots. Community meeting attendance sheets, a photo of Sophie at the groundbreaking sketchbook in hand on his shoulders, a note from Mrs. Mitchell thanking him for making sure the contractor scheduled work around her tomato growing season. Catherine had stopped by that morning, not for a meeting, just to drop off a folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from Dr. Patel, Sophie's therapist, written at Marcus's request for the project files. Sophie Hayes has demonstrated remarkable progress over the past 6 months. Her verbal communication has expanded from 3 words to full sentences. Her selective mutism, while still present in high-stress situations, has significantly decreased in frequency and duration. In my professional opinion, the consistency of her residential and educational environment has been the primary factor enabling this recovery. Disruption of this stability at this stage would likely have resulted in significant regression. Marcus read it twice. Then he pinned it to the corkboard next to Jonathan's original site survey notes. He thought about what Catherine had said in the car once. Jonathan always said the biggest mistake in community development is hiring people who have to learn the community from a distance. He thought about 87 families who were still in their homes, who still woke up in the same bedrooms, walked the same streets, saw the same neighbors, whose kids still went to the same schools. He thought about Sophie, who had said 23 words yesterday, full sentences, to her teacher, to a classmate, to him. "Can I have mac and cheese for dinner? I finished my homework. I drew something for you." 23 words that wouldn't have existed if Catherine Westbrook had looked away instead of looking at Jonathan's blueprints, if she had chosen comfort over what was right. His phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Board approved the final design revisions. Construction starts June 1st. Ribbon cutting estimated March next year. Jonathan would be proud. So am I. He read it twice. Typed back, "Thank you for everything. For Sophie. For all of us." 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Then, "Thank you for telling me the truth when staying silent would have been easier. That's the only reason any of this exists." He looked at the message for a long moment. Then he put the phone down and looked out the window at Riverside Avenue, at the corner where construction equipment was already staging, where in less than a year the Riverside Center would stand, where Jonathan's vision would finally take the shape it was always meant to have. That evening he picked Sophie up from school. She ran to him, no hesitation now, and held up her sketchbook before he could even ask. She'd drawn the construction site, the equipment, the workers, the corner, and in the center she'd drawn the building again. The same one she'd drawn at the groundbreaking, but this time she'd added something. People. Dozens of stick figures going in and out of the doors, kids playing in the green space, families sitting at tables, and at the bottom of the page in her careful handwriting, "This is what happens when someone listens." He crouched down to her level. "That's exactly right, Bug." She smiled, not a small smile anymore, a real one, the kind that takes over her whole face before she can decide how much of it she wants to show, just like the smile in the photo of Catherine and Jonathan in hard hats. Just like the smile of someone who knows with absolute certainty that what they're building matters. They walked to the car holding hands. The Riverside evening was doing what it always did. Neighbors calling to each other. Someone's music from an upstairs window. The particular noise of a neighborhood that had figured out how to stay alive because someone had believed it was worth saving. And above them, on Mrs. Mitchell's fire escape 3 floors up, tomato plants were already starting to climb their stakes, reaching for the summer sun that was still months away but coming. Always coming. Because that's what happens when you build something real. It grows. It lasts. It becomes the ground that other good things stand on. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, you get to be the person who drove someone to the place where they could finally see what needed to be built. And then you get to help them build it. And then you get to watch your daughter smile in the shadow of something that almost didn't exist. Something that exists now, because 2 quiet people decided to be louder than everyone else. Marcus Hayes had taken a job nobody wanted, and it had become the thing he needed most. Not the salary, though, that mattered. Not the title, though he'd earned it. But the knowledge that silence is only powerful when you know exactly when to break it. And that truth spoken at the right moment to the right person can move mountains. Or at least move 87 families from demolition notices to front row seats at a groundbreaking. He drove Sophie home through streets that would still be here tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. For as long as anyone could see. Finally home, both of them, for good.